So my topic is the Turkic or epic element in Chinghiz Aitmatov's novel, The Fairy Tale Retold, The White Ship. Just a little bit introductory. So the Turkic literary heritage was primarily passed on through oral transmissions, and only some was written down. And during the Soviet period, this practice of the literary tradition was labeled as reactionary, so it was not promoted by the state, nor it was it got any development during the period. And Chinghiz Aitmatov, the famous Kyrgyz author, he received Russian education at a very young age. So he produced books in both Russian and Kyrgyz. The book, The White Ship, was published in 1970s on a Russian journal called Novizhmil, and it stirred up really controversial reactions among the Soviet Kyrgyz. So I find this topic really interesting because I was curious about how this non-material cultural heritage was perceived during the Soviet time, and especially oral epics is just passed down generations by generations, through oral transmission, and it's just so fascinating to find out how it was this transmission was disrupted, but my focus was not on how these things was because of that. So I start to dive into how the intellectuals thought about their sort of indigenous literary form. And by reading Chinghiz Aitmatov's novel, I realized, hey, he was actually it kind of appeals to a nationalistic sentiment in his novel, despite he's symbolically a Soviet writer. So I thought it was really interesting to combine the Turkic or epics with Chinghiz Aitmatov. So my argument is that stereotypically, from an outsider perspective, the Soviet writers seem to be restricted by a hegemonic and rigid Soviet cultural framework. However, studying Aitmatov's novels disproves this stereotype. This is illustrated by the fact that Chinghiz Aitmatov's novels are infused with Turkic or epic elements, and in his 1970s novel, The White Ship, its narrative structure is inspired by the narrative techniques and the poetic structures of our epics, and the dictions that he employs just sheer lots of similarities with the ones that were used in our epics. And he also crafted his characters and emphasized on themes that were pretty identical in Turkic or epics. So my primary source is just the novel, and the secondary source mainly are books and journal articles. But since in the West we don't have much, we don't study much about the Central Asian epics, and if we do, it's mainly for the purpose of comparative studies. So compare the Harmonic, the Greek epics with the Central Asian or epics. And so the books, the one by Chadwick and the one by Raquel, they're just two major ones talking about Central Asian or epics, but they both just give an introductory account on the topic, which is just serves the purpose of my research. So a brief plot summary of what happened in the book. So the book, the protagonist is the boy, never giving a specific name. So he lived with his grandpa Monun and his step grandma in this village nearby the Isikul. And there's also the antagonist. And the antagonist is Oruz Gul. So he's the richest and the most powerful man in the village because he is the manager of a forest station. And Monun works for him, and Monun is also his father-in-law. So the boy was abandoned by his mother at a very young age, and he grew up with his grandpa. And his grandpa always tells him this tale of the honored mother deer. So the honored mother deer is said to rescue the Kyrgyz children from their enemy, and she brought them from the other side to the Issaquah, and she raised them, but the descendants of those children end up killing the deers the world on the mountain. So the mother deer was enraged, and she just left Issaquah and said she would never come back. But the boy was always very fond of the cow, and one day deers actually showed up in the village, and everyone was so surprised about it, and the boy was really happy about it. But then at the end, again, Oruzkul and his fellow men killed the deer, and they were eating the meat of the deer and stuff. So the boy finding out, and his entire world was just crashed, and he committed suicide at the end of the book, and he imagined himself becoming a fish, because in early of the book he always imagined himself becoming a fish, and he would swim to find his parents and tell them his story. So let's go here. So I would argue that this narrative structure is similar to our epic one, and I named this as a Matrushka styled structure. So both Chadwick and Raquel talked about a technique of performing manas in their books. So the technique used by the manaschi, the bards, is that they would create a story extended from a preceding story, a previous story. So one story is born under another, and another is born under the previous one, and so forth continuously. So the bards can compose longer epic. So in Mana's context, if the person can perform a longer and more complete Manas, then he would be the winner. So I find out this narrative structure is also used by Aitmatov in this novel. So the story of the white ship and the boy is more under the story of the mother deer. It was the story of the mother deer was the main force that pulls the plot together. So you do see that how one legend is born under another legend, and I think this narrative structure signifies the importance of historical heritage and cultural values in the Kyrgyz society. And so we have to go down. I made the presentation for my entire paper. So here we go. So actually in our epics, the monocycles, they record life and activities of ship heroes of certain branch of the Kyrgyz tribes at a given period. So it's not just a fantasy, it's actually developed based on true historical events. And you do see that, okay, they would extend story by story, but always connected with the previous one. And Manas is not just about Manas himself. It actually introduced 8 generations of Manas kids. So you do see how Central Asian people are so focused on this thing. It's called cultural heritage and family genealogy. And everyone would always trace back, be I am from this tribe, I am from this tribe, then they had whatever history. So I think that was really important part of the Kyrgyz identity. But then during the Soviet time, people were so not blinded, but they were so much more into the material world, and they even looked down at their own indigenous culture and didn't perceive it very well. So I think Chinghiz Aitmatov, his technique of employing the past stories to create new story was trying to signify the importance of heritage of the one nation's history, and this sort of created allegorical effect for his story. And it's just the same as the epics, which always creates like a moral guidelines for people. So the art is about also transforming the concept of um, philosophy and moral virtues. And I think Chinghiz Aitmatov, he quotes directly from his book: "If people will not remember their fathers, they will go bad." Again, emphasize how it is important to know one's identity, to know their cultural heritage, to know their root. And I think he was trying to not to bring a certain types of like how do you say, like certain moral guidelines, certain principle that you must follow, but he was trying to shake the consciousness of people to contemplate about this problem, like what is the Kyrgyzness and what is important for Kyrgyz. I think that also was a common the characteristic between his novel and the Kyrgyz oral epics. So if you're interested, here's a link to the audiobook and the film. It's actually made during the Soviet time, so it will be really interesting to look at it. And I would also make like a full presentation and upload on my YouTube. So if you're interested, you can have a look there. Thank you.